Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I think today's episode is going to be a real barn burner because what you don't see is in the background. When we bring on our guests, we chit chat and we get them all set up and situated and blah, blah, blah. And then I always ask, where are you from? Well, it turns out that our guest today is from the same community that I live in. And we didn't know. We booked him based on his work and what he had to talk about and share and how he could teach us. And so I know this dude's going to be great because he's here, right, Scott?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the sun rubs off on all of us, right? It's always a beautiful day here, so it's easy to be in a great mood.
Oh my God, that's great. I'm going to start using that. Well, Scott Adams, this is going to be really fun. This is the time of year, Scott, and we chatted about this in the green room too, is that so many nonprofits are thinking about their strategic plans and moving forward. I mean, so many folks are shaking their heads saying, holy moly, 2025, it's here. And what are we going to do and all that? So this is going to be a great conversation because it's really an important thing that we need to be talking about. Another important thing that we need to be talking about are our amazing sponsors, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that pretty much all of these businesses have been with us since day one, and we are just getting ready to celebrate our 1200th episode and moving in past 5 years. So that's a huge thing. Again, I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. We have this amazing cohort of co-hosts, say that fast 3 times, and they come to us from all parts of the country. They do all different things in the nonprofit sector, and really exciting to have them as part of our team. Okay, Scott Adams, you're part of our team today, being on the Nonprofit Show, founder, CEO, and consultant with Adams Consulting Firm. Welcome, my new friend.
Thank you. Glad to be on here. And wow, congratulations. Closing in on 1,200. That's pretty incredible.
I know it is. When you do a broadcast every day, all of a sudden it starts racking up the numbers. And so,
Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun because we get to meet people like you from all over the world. Super kooky that you would be in my community, unbeknownst to me. But anyway, talk to us about what Adams Consulting does, because we want to get that as a framework before we get into this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. Again, honored to be a part of the run of your show here. Adams Consulting Firm, I work with companies big and small in the healthcare, wellness, and sports sector, and particularly those that are trying to integrate tech into what they do. So I work with those companies, say healthcare companies, to really align their strategic process from whether it's a fractional COO, a fractional chief of staff, or strategic advisory services. In addition, companies that are tech-based that bring technology into those sectors. So I work with companies that are more recently AI-backed that are trying to move technology into that sector. But really the essence of what I do is help them grow and scale and speak the language of all those different groups.
Okay, well, you must be exhausted because that's a heavy lift, especially when things are changing so fast. And I got to say that the nonprofit sector, for all the wonderful and wondrous things we do, we don't embrace change so well. I feel like, Scott, we're the
Yeah.
last ones to come to the party, and it's such a dreadful part, right,
Yeah.
of how we can grow and scale. And so I love that you're in this space, and I think it's really, really exciting. Let's get into kind of this concept of strategic alignment. We hear about alignment and we hear about strategy, but a lot of times we don't put them together. So help
Yeah.
me understand what this concept is.
Yeah, and first let me say, I agree with you. Change is hard, right? And change in nonprofit sector is very hard, but it's not that far behind healthcare, right? So there are lots of parallels between how healthcare navigates a nonprofit, and strategic alignment is, in the nonprofit world, you have limited resources. There's not enough time in the day, right? We can go on and on about the challenges, but strategic alignment is really making sure that everyone, we're talking the top of the organization to your volunteers, are pulling in the same direction, right?
Mhm.
The equivalent of a sports team, and I'm a big sports guy. Um, Not so much luck in the Valley recently with the teams here, but it's like having a team, and you can have the team with the highest paid players, but if they're not working towards that same goal, they're not going to achieve greatness. They're not going to win the championship. It's the same
Right.
thing with the nonprofit, right?
Mhm.
Everyone has to be pulling the same way. So it's just a method of making sure that you have your I's dotted, your T's crossed, and you're
Mhm.
all pulling the same direction so you get the most out of your workforce.
This is really a serious conversation and a topic because I think, and you probably experience this every day, so many of us are siloed. And
Yeah.
so it makes it really hard and somewhat frightening for, especially in the nonprofit sector, where you're so burdened, as you mentioned, with this limited resource. And sometimes it's mental, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's financial, but most of the time it's financial. But then you're getting all these things thrown at you, and you're trying to figure out which fire to put out.
Yeah.
And it's really an interesting thing that you almost give us permission to stop and reevaluate or center so that we can then be moving across all the different groups that we serve.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that strategic alignment really helps out with, right? When you're talking about putting out fires all day, you're talking about not having enough time.
Mhm,
Strategic alignment is really prioritizing what you're working on now so
mhm,
that when you go to make that decision, where do I spend my time? It's an
mhm.
easier process to decide, right? Um,
Right.
I've done it, you can do it a lot of different ways, but a lot with a lot of different groups, and same with your resources too.
Mhm,
A lot of nonprofits have many different programs, and it becomes really scattered at times. And it's, what program are we focusing on now? Where should we drive the money to? Where do I need to spend my time? So,
mhm,
really aligning on what's most important for the next year, the next quarter, even the next month can really guide those decisions and really free up the time. And it kind of empowers you sometimes to give you back time that you would have normally, spent scattered on a lot of other initiatives.
I'm fascinated by this because I almost hear you saying this gives us permission to say no. And maybe
Mhm.
that's just what I'm hearing.
Nope,
But
right.
it talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, you find it again. A lot of the happens in the large and the small, sector, right? And you see it a lot with small businesses and new companies. And I work with a lot of new companies, and I work with a handful of nonprofits too that are small, but it's the same problems, right? You try to chase everything, right? You're trying to chase every donor. You're trying to chase every program. You're trying to make as much impact as you can, and I get it, right? But you have to really focus. The more you focus, the better you get, right? It's similar again. Sorry, I'm stealing another sports analogy here, but if you think of an athlete, right, the more they're focused in on what they're doing, the
Mhm.
better they are. And it's the same with your nonprofit, with your business, even with your day to day life, right? It's eliminating the distractions. Like you said, it is. It's permission to say no, and it's
Yeah.
permission to look at things and figure out, hey, my time's most valuable spent with these donors, with these initiatives,
Mhm.
and the other stuff can wait, right? And I
Mhm.
know that's such a hard thing to deal with, and it's such a hard feeling, like a business owner that needs money. Don't go chasing it, right? It's going to make you worse. So you can have more impact being more focused.
Right. And I think that when we work in a spirit of fear versus abundance, which I know sounds woo woo, and I know it sounds like, yeah, but when you've got bills to pay,
Yeah.
this isn't very realistic. But it seems to me, Scott, over the trajectory of my career, when I ask very successful people, how they have achieved their success, whether it's leading a nonprofit or even a for-profit, a lot of times they kind of come back to that ecosystem of understanding what their business is, and
Hmm.
then trying to like almost put on blinders, right?
Yeah.
And think, I can't let some of
Yeah.
these outside things go on. And whew, that's tough. I mean, that not too many people can do that. So let's talk about that. How do we navigate towards alignment? When, as you mentioned, there's so many things coming at us, and let's face it, in the nonprofit sector, a lot of times we deal with life and death issues that
Yeah.
it's a luxury to say not now.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. But it's those priorities, right? So, what are the most important parts? So, what I like to do is really look at an organization. Um, I typically go through, it's too much to discuss at once, but 7 different kind of factors that we look at, and there's 20 tasks total to look at. But
Wow.
it's making sure you have that alignment, right? One of the things that's been most useful that I've used with companies I've worked with and even roles that I've had is making sure everyone has their quarterly goal and their three initiatives that I'm working towards this quarter as most important. And that's going to guide you to where you spend your time and where you spend your resources. But that goes from the top down, right? It just doesn't stop at the executive group. It has to go down to the volunteers, right? They have to also be aligned with, hey, as a volunteer, what are your 3 main objectives for the next quarter that you're working towards, right? And it's the transparency as to what everyone knows what everyone else is working on, because that provides the pulling forward in the same direction, right? If I know, Julia, what you're working on, I might come across some information or meet some people that can help you to achieve your goals, right? But without me knowing what you're working towards or what your priorities are, that doesn't give me direction on how to delegate or how to pass over or how to help enhance what you're doing. Um, and the other part of that too is, again, that conversation goes from the top down. Everything in an organization really goes from the bottom up, right? The people that are actually out there doing the physical work, making the phone calls, creating the connections, right? Those are the people that are doing the job, not the executives, right? So we have to look at things that way. So even as an executive creating your goal, you should have a discussion with your volunteers as well as to, hey, this is what my goals are. This is what I think. What's your feedback on this? Right. And that should carry out throughout the whole organization. So that's the way that I've had success with it. Again, it's a hard process to go through, right?
Yeah.
And having that level of transparency is scary sometimes, especially for executives because they're not used to it.
Right.
But that's the type of transparency you really need to be successful with your limited resources.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think that, oddly enough, we are so reticent to ask for help, and we kind of want to keep our little kingdoms together and everything. And I think that also this, for some people, being that transparent, it's a little frightening because folks can see when you're not being successful or you're not achieving
Yeah.
what you wanted to, right? And so I think that's another piece of that pie that we have to kind of reframe and really think about. It's a fascinating thing to get into all of this discussion and realize how much of this becomes egocentric and
Hmm.
personality driven,
Yeah.
and the frailties of all this. So I want to spend the last amount of time on this like huge question, and that is, how long is this going to take? I mean, Scott, I talk to a lot of people that get excited and they go to, maybe they watch the nonprofit show, they go to a conference, they go to lunch with somebody, they get
Hmm.
all like pumped up, and then they come back to their organization and they're like, holy crap, this is pushing a boulder uphill. So
Yeah.
how do we get through this?
Yeah. So one, again, I'm not bursting any bubbles here. We're all guilty of that, right?
Yeah.
It is a boulder going up the hill, right? And it's the hill's not straight, right? You live out here, like Camelback Mountain or one of the other mountains. It's not a straight climb. There's ups and downs even in the climb up the hill, and it's going to be the same way. Um, it is something that has to consistently be done, and I think that's the what people fall into, kind of those little caverns of, hey, I have this great idea, but I try to implement it day one, but it kind of worked, but what happened day 2, day 3, day 7, day 200, right? It falls off. So the change takes time. What really helps to reduce that time are a couple things. One, it has to start at the top, right? If your top level executives are doing the same thing, and they're making it part of their daily routine and everyone is transparent, that helps, right? Because that helps institute change. If someone is doing it and then not doing it and they
Yeah.
want you to do it, right, that doesn't work well.
Right.
So the other nice part, and I'm glad you mentioned it earlier, it's that being scared of someone not achieving their goals, right?
Mhm.
But we also have to acknowledge too, from a goal standpoint, and this comes to change as well, we're not going to achieve all of our goals every time, right? And that's
Right.
okay, right? That gives us an opportunity to learn and adjust our path to how we can achieve it next time. um, so like it does take time, so it's going to be a process, but you have to stay consistent with the process, and that's part of what establishing your strategic vision does. It keeps you consistent with your process from a day-to-day perspective, a week to week, and a month to month, which then you can start to pull change, right? We can't change the world in a day, right? You can't help 100 people in a day. It's the same thing going through this. It has to be consistent and it has to take time.
Mhm.
And it will be hard, but that's okay.
So I mean, do you as a leader and coaching leaders, do you start off saying, "Hey team, this is the new path we're going to go. We're going to really think about ourselves in terms of alignment, and it's going to be hard and you might get frustrated," or do you pull that in, further into the process? Like, because you know what I'm saying, leading
Yeah.
people and trying to get them engaged in something that frankly, strategic planning gets a black eye.
Hmm.
Anybody that did strategic planning prior to or during the global pandemic pretty much had nothing achieved, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and now people are reticent to get back into it. So how do we get the soup made, I guess, is what I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know the feeling. And again, I led 2 departments at Mayo through COVID. And I know Mayo's a different nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
It's a profit nonprofit, but you have to be honest, right? Because as a leader, if you're not showing your vulnerability and not being honest and authentic, then it's really challenging because that gets broken down, right? People will see through it. Um, so to make the soup, you have to be honest up front, right? And if you look back, the reason you're doing some of this stuff is because maybe you haven't been as successful in the past as you want to be or should be. So something has to change, right? You can't do the same thing. So I've always found lay the cards on the table, right? This isn't going to be easy, right? Change is hard. Um, However, we know that if we're pulling the same way, we can get more out of each other, right? And we can get more out of what we're doing and impact more people, which is really the goal. And establishing those focus actually, it allows people to buy into the process and they feel invested in the process because, oh, wow, look, the CEO or executive director has talked to me as a volunteer about what they're working on and a discussion as to is that the right thing that they should be working on, and we've had that dialogue, so it starts to build connections and trust that weren't there before. So even if, say, all the strategic planning goes to waste and you have to change things a few times, you really start to build a better culture in your organization that becomes more collaborative, more trusting, which really helps out in the long run. One more thing that I want to throw out there, and again, this is something that a lot of people are going to probably not be happy about, but I've learned recently, we all create, the keep it simple goals, right? And when you're doing your quarterly goals, they shouldn't be keep it simple goals, right? They should be they should be your stretch goals, right? Because if we're keeping it simple, we're just doing the same thing over and over, right?
Okay.
So your stretch goals should be your quarterly goals. But when
Okay.
we're talking your 6 month goals and 1 year goals, I want to give you a little different perspective on things. Knowing when we're setting goals, we're trying to achieve great things, right? And I always like to work from a process, especially on the operational side and strategic side, is how do we grow this exponentially versus linear, right? Because your decision making gets better. You don't have to go over and redo things as you grow and scale. So I would challenge your yearly goals to really give you 3 years to accomplish them. So I'm going to set a really high goal for, say, year one, raising donations. All right, I'm
Right.
going to set it higher than I ever have before. right? And if I don't achieve it year one, that's okay. That's not a fail. Give yourself 3 years to achieve that one goal, right? Because it gives you a different mindset when you're working towards things. And scaling exponentially, oddly enough, is easier than scaling on a linear path. And I'm sure that's another conversation for another day. Um, but I would challenge you to think about your goals that way. And again, that leads back to talking about it's hard, right? And what if you're not successful? Hey, it's okay, right? Have we taken steps in the right direction? What have we learned so that we can change? And maybe year two, we achieve it. And try to work towards that goal. I know it's hard and I know it's different, but I promise you, you'll see better results doing it that way.
Well, I think that I can speak for myself in looking at my own goals every year and evaluating them and everything. Um, it would be such a beatdown this time of year, coming to the end and Q4 and saying, I didn't get this done, I didn't get this done, da 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 da. And this last year or two, I have navigated towards like a scale and grading myself, like what
Yeah.
percentage of my goals overall, I weight them, and then what percentage did I achieve, and then what percentage of each goal. And when I went to that method, I found that I was more successful than I thought, as opposed
Yeah.
to missing the mark on one thing and having that just rain down on me like the rain of failure, right?
Right.
Which is such a bad way to be in your head. When you
Yeah.
have that, it's just ridiculous, right?
Hmm.
It makes you hate planning. It makes you close out the year on a bad note, and you just like get away from those goals, or you don't keep engaging, right? But
Yeah.
it seems to me that when you can kind of measure up and measure out, that has been a huge game changer for me. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you see that or not.
I do, and I'm glad you do it that way. A quick question I'll ask you is like, Julia, do you think you can get 1% better every day?
Oh God. So this is the
Right?
Steve Nash thing. Steve Nash, the great, great NBA player,
Yeah.
was asked once, how do you perceive greatness and how do you move forward? And he said, if I can be 2% better than anybody else out there, I'm a champion. And
Yeah.
I had never thought of that until I heard him say that. And I was like, holy moly, it totally changed my mind.
Yeah.
So
And
thank you for bringing that up. See,
it's
you're
the
an athlete.
same it's the same way with an organization, right?
Yeah.
Can you get 1% better every day? That doesn't seem hard, right?
Yeah,
But that's what
right.
we're talking about, right? The strategic alignment and improvement, it is 1% every day. And I can't
Yeah.
remember what that adds up to over time, but over a year, when you look back, right, Julia, you're like, I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I've learned these many things. Maybe I achieved one of my 3 goals for the year, but I am so much better than I was before that I have a better chance next year of doing it. And that's the same thing with this kind of different way of thinking about goals too, right? You're working towards something, right? You're
Yeah.
not trying to just check off the box that I did it. And that improvement is more important sometimes than the actual outcome.
It seems to me, Scott, that you have reframed this away from like task management to, overall improvement and more of a cerebral thing. And that's an interesting aspect because I feel like so many of us, when we talk about strategic planning and strategic management, and even like the management of that plan, like how often do
Mhm.
we review it and who sees it and how do we score ourselves? It's task oriented. And I'd love in the few minutes we have left if you could talk about that because that's a different relationship.
Yeah, it is. And, it's a combination of those tasks or a summation of those tasks that actually help you kind of get there and achieve the goal, right? Um, but when you're thinking about, again, the day to day, like how fun is it to repeat tasks or to accomplish 10 different tasks in a day? It's not, right? That's the tedious, grinding work that will sometimes like burn us out, right? But if you think of it differently as improvement, it's the same stuff, but it's just a different perspective of things, and mindset's everything sometimes. And again, it's part of it. There's a bunch of tasks for you to achieve your goal, but what are you what are you improving during those tasks? Like, what have you learned? And shaping it that way really takes a whole different approach to it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated by this, and I feel like it's going to reverberate strongly with a lot of nonprofits because we do work in an emotional, mental space where we're trying to navigate our personal lives and the challenges that we have in
Yeah.
our sector with impact, right?
Mhm.
And it's really hard. And you use that B word, man, burnout is one of the big top issues that we have with our labor force across the country, but
Yeah.
certainly in the nonprofit sector. This is one of the plagues, the great plagues, that has descended upon our sector, and everybody's talking about it and everybody's concerned about it. And so I can see we're kind of rethinking and reshaping how we engage with our strategic planning could be a saving grace.
Yeah, and again, part of that's getting your time back, right? Burnout, part of burnout is spending too much time on things, and by reprioritizing what you're doing,
Mhm.
Julia, you realize, hey, I don't have to pursue those 4 opportunities. They're kind of outside what I'm looking to do, right? So that could save you 20 hours a week, whatever that is. So that's part of managing kind of your day to day, because you're right. We're in industries that it's emotional, and that wears on you more than somebody who's not in those industries. So you really have to kind of find that balance. And I
Mhm.
find the companies I've worked with, and even myself in my day to day with my company, I don't find that unless I have those priorities set and that alignment set.
Mhm. I love it. Well, this has been great. I feel like you've taken us to church here. You've like helped us think about our brains and our personalities and our mindset. Then, the mission management, the management of
Yeah.
a mission, which we don't always talk about. We talk about, the mission that we have and the vision and we make it almost like a fight or a battle that we're,
Yeah.
moving forward, and we attach all these emotions to it, but the practicality of it wears, and I feel like that's where the alignment gets off. And so this has been a marvelous, marvelous conversation. Wow. And then of course that you're from my community here. I'm like, I knew you were going to be great, Scott. I just knew it when I found out where you're from. Scott Adams, founder, CEO, and consultant of Adams Consulting Firm. Check out adamsconsultingfirm.com, and you can learn more about Scott and his work and his team and the things that they do. Great conversation, Scott, especially this time of year when so many of us, as we launched into this episode of the Nonprofit Show, they're thinking about their strategic plans. And generally, not a lot of them embrace it with excitement and say, yay, team, we're going to do this, right? Usually it's like, I have to do this.
Right. It's the funnest time of year, right? It's Christmas time, right? It's strategic alignment planning time. It's all those things. So it excites me.
Good. It should. Well, it should excite all of us because, it's not a news story, but when you have this umbrella of gloom and doom over you, that's never a good place to start, right? I mean,
No.
that's never going to be productive. So changing that mindset is huge. Really, really
Yeah.
has been. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and we're delighted that you would come on the Nonprofit Show. We need to get you back here and help us to even further understand some of the options that we have when we're trying to lead our nonprofits, especially with a strategic eye. So thank you so much, Scott. Another shout out of gratitude and thanks needs to go to our sponsors, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out so we can bring you our guests like we have today with Scott Adams. All right. I am going to witness to you personally, Scott, that I'm in it. I'm working, I'm finishing up my strategic plan personally and professionally for the next year. But you've given me some thoughts. I'm going to go back and realign a few things.
That's perfect. I'm glad I could help there. And just remember one thing, Julia, and can you promise me one thing?
Yes.
That you'll also give yourself grace, right? If everything's not perfect, it's okay. And we can work towards a better tomorrow.
I love that. Well, you're a kind man, and I might have to put that in the notes. Put that up at the top,
Do it.
because that doesn't always happen. That doesn't always happen. Well, as we like to end each and every episode with this message, it means something different. And especially today, it means something different to me. And we end with this message: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks.